Welcome you all to this presentation in the online EAPRIL environment. This is the presentation of Cloud 10. Cloud 10 is all about assessment and evaluation. And presenters today am myself and my esteemed colleague, Dr. Verboei from the Netherlands. And together we will give this presentation about our research that we did in assessment changes in higher education due to the COVID-19 outbreak.
Yes. Well, we all encountered COVID. We all had to adjust our education, and more precise, we also had to change the way we assessed our students. Uh, but you and I were talking about the assessment we encountered within our own institutes. Uh, we wondered, we have a good view about our own institutes, but how about the others? Uh, we realized that COVID doesn't stop at the borders of countries. So the adjustment also is more or less worldwide. We therefore thought that it would be very nice to ask the EAPRIL community about the way they adjusted their way of assessment. And in order to do so, we asked the community just a couple of straightforward questions. The first one is did you adjust your education and more precise the way you assess your students? Of course, what problems did you encounter by doing so? But also, COVID will one day be part of our history. Nevertheless, what do you think will be here to stay? What kind of impact will it have on our future education? The EAPRIL office was nicely rated. Was so nice to send out our interview, our survey. I must say that a little bit disappointed. Only 15 respondents did react. But nicely to say, it was from 8 different countries. We also had one respondent from a country with hardly any internet. And it was very nice to read about how they coped with COVID within that country. It was by using old-fashioned telephones and the post office. It was very nice to read how they coped with it. Our number of respondents was very limited, I must say. It's hardly. I think Jeroen told our research well. I must say it's so less. I wonder if it's research, but it's giving us some insight. We also used our own experiences within our own institutes to fulfill the number a little bit more. And I think that nonetheless, we have just a few respondents. Our results are quite interesting.
Yes. Speaking of results, as Fer already mentioned, not a huge number of participants filled in our questionnaire, but nevertheless, we could make out some interesting results. And one result that we encountered was that there was clearly an educational transition happening. And we could make out 2 different kinds of transitionings. And the first one was a conversion of the physical face-to-face environment towards a digital face-to-face environment. And sometimes this transition was one-folded, meaning that what is happening in visual education was not adapted, but just translated to a digital face-to-face environment. But we also encountered some beautiful examples of a real transition. And in these environments, we saw an accelerated use of communication software. And we added and not digital learning environment specifically because we saw those differences. Just accelerated use of communication software does not necessarily mean that there is a lot of developing in education. One nice example of a digital environment that we saw, which was an accelerated use of communication software, but also a development of educational environments, was a citation that says, well, the use of Google Classroom, Lumen Video and screencasting and Google Meet in live classes. Each day I assigned at work through Google Classroom and pupils submitted assignments which I was corrected. Then the teacher explained this correction through individual feedback and Loom videos, and this was done in a digital environment, of course. And this example shows us that not only is it possible to use digital environments as an alternative to what we normally do in a physical environment, but to actually do all the parts, not just the lecture sent to a big number of peoples, but also the individual feedback sessions, which is not standard, which is not done by everybody. And what we also saw was an intensive use of other digital tools like Moodle as a digital learning environment and Zoom, like Teams we're using now, but also PowerPoint added by audio, was spoken in by a lecturer, or Google Docs, whether or not complied with AVG rules, but also always used by teachers to adapt to new resources. What we saw was that, however, the transition was sometimes made, most transitions were towards a little more autonomy. What we mean by that was that, for example, big lectures were transferred to a digital learning environment, but then most of the students were on their own. And that's one of the problems that we encountered. And Fer will now tell us about something of the framework that we looked at.
Yes. We looked especially within the internet about experiences with COVID. We had to use internet because it was quite new and it didn't have a chance to be condensed in scientific articles or something like that. But we did find a very good site. It was a site from the European Training Foundation, which is a part of the European community. And they theorized about adapting ways to adapt assessment. They came to a framework with 4 different modes of coping, which you can see at our presentation. It's from maintaining to adapting. When you look at the different modes, you realize it's sometimes quite simple. Maintaining is what I can use nowadays too. Well, when you look already used open book exam or writing an essay as a way to assess your students. Of course, this is transferred into a digital environment quite easily. It's more of the same, you might say. What we see also, especially in the first phase of COVID, was cancelling the assessment. I must say that sometimes the cancelling mode, so to say, was taking more time. We found out that it was mostly the laboratory assessments, which was firstly cancelled. You can't ask your students to visit certain rooms at your institute in order to take an exam over there. And that impossibility endured. So it was from first, they spoke of we cancel this exam. And we will put another exam in the period after this. But realizing that COVID was taking quite a long time, they are postponing, and they are now encountering a lot of problems with it. Mostly done was with adapting. What you see is that different kind of assessment were put into a digital environment. So instead of written paper and pen related assessment, you changed into an oral exam, or you used the writing of an essay instead of it.
Yes, that's what we saw. So in addition to what Fer said about maintaining current assessments, cancelling or postponing, indeed what we found most interesting was the way that lecturers and teachers adapted assessments. And we saw in basic two different kinds of adapting. The first one is what Fer already mentioned, the transition from a paper environment to a digital environment, or a real transition. So for example, a multiple choice exam transfer to an oral exam. And what we also saw was a transition from one final big exam for a course to multiple smaller assignments. And this is concurrent with a formative or a programmatic assessment approach. And this was very interesting to see that COVID is somehow the motor behind these kind of transitions. And now we have to, so it's a stimulator sometimes. So large knowledge exams transfer to open book exams, less exams, sometimes a few of exams integrated into one another. And the problem with that is that you have to be careful not to create a too large exam to assess. And a discussion that we will come to later about multiple choice exams, taking multiple choice exams into take-home papers, because assessment had to make it to the home environment. And with a formative assessment, the criteria are less constrained, so that's what we saw happening. And a more approach to portfolio-based exams, in which multiple assessments were combined and assessed. So these were the major adaptations that we saw happening in answer to not be able to take physical exams in the universities, which was different. Sometimes exams could be taken physically, and sometimes they could not. Fair.
Yes.
Supporting this transition.
Yeah, the supports, I would say that what we noticed, that in the first phase, the support was quickly organized, but only within their own universities. So it was everybody inventing the same miracles in order to support their teachers. We saw also that there was a little bit of change. In the first phase, you might say, was to quickly help with a list of do's and don'ts given to the teachers in order to make a quick change in from their former way of assessment to the new more proper ways of assessment within a digital environment. Later on, we noticed that also institutions made a little bit of a change in their policies, because they were realizing now there are things here to stay. So we heard that there was a growing attention to ways of independent time and place independent ways of assessment. More emphasizes of the different kinds of assessments used. And the third phase, you might say, is that universities themselves went into a process of mutually exploring the possibilities of online assessment. We saw examples of online assessments made by one university were also used within another university, but also there were some general problems encountered with the digital assessment. And you see that the longer COVID was here, the more universities are eager to work together in order to solve that particular problems. Jeroen, what kind of problems?
Well, to add to your last comment, a nice example of exploration of communication between universities in the Netherlands is a special Microsoft Teams user forum about assessment literacy. It already was existing before COVID-19, but it developed rapidly after COVID-19 with all kinds of questions that Fer just mentioned. So the problems that were encountered, we saw a lot of problems in the answers that we got and in our daily life. So we narrowed it down to general problems that we saw. And the first one is plagiarism and authenticity. Being a chair of the board of examiners myself, I encountered not only in the universities in the Netherlands, but also in my own environment, possibilities and difficulties with these terms. But this wasn't very much an issue. And one example of this issue is the discussion about proctoring that we have. Because taking exams in the home of the students does something with the validity and reliability of online assessments. So proctoring was a very hot topic and still is in our universities. And it's nice to see that proctoring is a discussion as well as within universities who use proctoring, as well as universities who does not use proctoring. Because those who use see the problems and those who don't use see mainly the possibilities of proctoring. So this is an ongoing discussion. Also, we saw that we asked something of our examiners. Per and I are talking a lot of our lifetime about assessment literacy, not only in the cloud, but also in our working life. And this is a time when we see that assessment literacy is of vital importance in the transition and the adaptation of assessment in a new environment. So people have to develop certain skills in a rapid process. And we see that some teachers who are coming from a more formative or a more programmatic perspective, they adapt more quickly because their assessment literacy is much more widened and more thorough than others. Another thing that we encountered was the misalignment between the online environment and the way we address each other in real time. Because monitoring students when they're not sitting on the other side of the table is difficult, and you have to have some special attention to the missing of this opportunity. And what we noticed was that to adapt exams thoroughly and well, you have to have a good overview of the mastery levels and the interrelationships of the various learning objectives, because it's easier than ever to just stay focused on your course and your own goals when it comes to assessment. And what we see is that it's now, because some assessment are integrated or adapted or put together, that it's more important than ever that you have that overview of your total curriculum. And finally, but not the least of all, that a good internet connection is vital. For instance, seeing students to be able to keep your camera on and not overload your internet connection or the server from Microsoft Teams or Zoom or whatever is still a vital issue. So although in this day and age it's very nice to have this kind of opportunities, can you imagine what would happen if COVID-19 struck us 20 years ago? But still, it's a vital part of this transition.
Yes. As we told before, we also ask respondents their views on the question, what's here to stay? And 3 points were quite outstanding within the answers given. The first of all, teachers got more acquainted with this online teaching, as Jeroen also told. And they're stating, well, the experience made so far, we will continue in the near future. So hybrid education will be a part of the future of higher education also. What also is here to stay, that the way we adapted, the way we assessed, which was using more formative and a more programmatic approach. A lot of teachers who made this transformation told us, well, it's very nice to do. And we are more strongly advocate that we will continue this kind of this line of working. What we all see also see that people are realizing that making a transition to a more digital suited way of assessment did also change something in the mastery levels where it's assessed. We see a decrease of the use of for instance, multiple choice testing, and we see an increase of ways of evaluating the things, showing your insight. For instance, when you use an essay instead of an MC, the mastery level which you're looking at within your assessment is changing. What we suppose and what we hear from from the teachers we interviewed is that there is an increase of the mastery level, and it's making our education much more valid. We are more demanding towards our students, and we want to be that because we feel the value of our education is increasing with this kind of assessment. Jeroen?
Yes. Some conclusions then in this little survey / research, little small research. There are a number of things that we can conclude from this this data. And the first one is that COVID can be seen in twofold ways. As an incentive for universities for a development of online education, and as an accelerator, because most universities already have some kind of digital environment. But for assessment, it's even more so, because what we also see that was that alternative assessment forms, like oral exams or take-home papers, do facilitate teachers to focus less on knowledge and more on higher mastery levels, what Fer was talking about. And these alternative assessment forms mostly facilitate a more integrative approach instead of a more simple focus on knowledge or skills separately. And we believe that is a good thing. And as a result, what we see is that students are noticing the strengthening of the curriculum. And not students alone, but also the teachers. And maybe a downside is that some students don't exactly perceive this as strengthening, but more as an aggravated curriculum. But that's on a little side note. But it makes us think about and rethink, reevaluate our ways of assessing. So that's a positive about the COVID-19 outbreak. It forces us to rethink our university assessment systems. So with all that being said, we're now going to transition over to our Q&A session, which will be not in an asynchronous world, but we'll do live instead. Okay.
Thank you.